While the flames were slowly consuming the entire place, Camus began to stare at them intently, extended her hand and started to summon a fireball. At first, Vicar and Dollars remained silently watching her. But then Vicar's gaze fixed on her, creating tension in the atmosphere. No one knew what Camus was doing in this place. Dollars began to observe Vicar with a surprised expression and couldn't help but blush upon seeing that the Night Hound had protected her. She became nervous, turned her head to one side, and her eyes filled with surprise. In a matter of seconds, the flames consumed most of this place, and the fireball that Camus had summoned slowly began to grow larger. Dolores' attention was fixed on Camus, and she soon realized that her attack was not only directed at the Night Hound but also at her, asking if she too was an undead. Vicar put the cloak in front of her to protect her from the attack and mentioned that she probably was also an undead. He began staring intently at Camus and asked Dolores how long this woman had been with Quilty. She clenched her fists, turned her head towards Vicar and with an insecure and uncertain expression revealed that she had recently heard that this woman had been hired by Quilty. After saying this, with a lost gaze she sank into her thoughts. She was not willing to stand idly by, so she clasped both hands together, causing a golden glow to appear. With a firm look, she mentioned that as a servant of God, she could not stand idly by if the opponent was an undead, deciding to provide support to the Night Hound. Camus, who was standing in front of them, prepared to attack, but our boy started walking towards her and ordered Dollars to step back since he wanted to verify something about this woman. Upon hearing this, Dollars decided to at least offer support with a healing spell, but our boy refused, explaining that it wasn't necessary. Seeing that Vicar was approaching, Camus, who had her hand extended towards them, decided to change her method of attack. She used her power, making the flames grow more intense, and at that moment, spikes made of explosive energy emerged from nowhere. She began to control the spikes and hurled them forcefully toward Vicar. As the attack slowly approached, Vicar unsheathed the Beelzebub sword and continued walking toward her without the slightest intention of backing down. Just before the attack could hit him, he swung the sword with precision, cutting the spikes into small pieces without much effort, and with a piercing look indicated to Camus that this type of attack was not going to work against him. But to Vicar's surprise, the spikes exploded behind him, creating small but powerful explosions. Our boy began observing her in silence, realizing that he had narrowly escaped. With an angry expression full of rage, Camus prepared to attack again. She was not willing to give up so easily. Vicar recognized her long, straight red hair. She was using magic that seemed to be at least level 6, combining iron and fire. It wasn't common to find someone capable of using that level of magic at such a young age, even within the prestigious Morg family specialized in magic. Our boy was quite injured and decided to change plans, sheathing the Beelzebub sword. Noticing this, Camus decided to take advantage of it. She extended her hands backward and used her power to summon more spikes again. But Vicar stood firm. Due to the fire, pieces of wood from the ceiling were now stuck in the ground. She threw the spikes at him, creating large and powerful explosions near him. But once the smoke curtain created by the explosions began to fade, Vicar emerged unscathed. And with a murderous look he grabbed one of the pieces of wood. Camus attacked again, and the explosive spikes passed close to Vicar's shoulders, creating small cuts on his shoulders, and despite being injured, he continued walking firmly towards his target. She attacked again, but Vicar slightly turned his head to the side, causing the attack to destroy part of his hood. He began staring at her, indicating that he was not ready to give up so easily. Seeing this, Dolores panicked and her gaze filled with concern. She didn't know why the Night Hound was heading straight into the attacks. Camus did not stop attacking. She extended her hand towards them and started launching a chain of spikes. Several of them struck Vicar's body, but despite this, he stood firm and continued walking toward his target. Dolores began to observe our boy, and it didn't take long for her to come to the conclusion that Vicar was planning something and knew this woman. Many questions came to her mind, questioning what the relationship between them was. Vicar began staring at her, remembering the past. He started imagining Camus sitting in a chair, and next to her uncle. Before regressing, it was known that she got along well with Adolf Morg, so in that case, there would have been no reason for her to go into closed-door training. When Vicar was a child, one day he ran into Camus, who was furious, asking what he had just said. Our boy remained calm and stayed silent. On another occasion, she began pointing at the city map with her finger, and with a furious expression she made sure he understood where the blonde's mineral property was. In the past, during a fight, she fell to her knees on the ground, but Vicar appeared to protect her, and some time later, when they both grew up a little more, they rode horses, and with a happy smile Camus gave our boy 8 out of 100 points for knowing well the ecology of barbarian tribes. Some time later, Vicar extended his hand towards her. One day someone tried to attack her, but Vicar intervened and put his hand in front, blocking the attack. In the forest where Madame was, Vicar prepared to fight while on the other side. Uncle Adolf and another boy took Camus away to keep her out of danger. She extended her hand towards Vicar, asking them to stop. The giant spider known as Madame emerged from the forest and began staring at our boy. He drew his sword, and while his body was surrounded by a powerful energy, he prepared to fight. While the ground was in flames, Vicar took a step toward her and began imagining innocent Camus. In conclusion, if he hadn't made contact with that girl, if he hadn't built a relationship with her, if only he hadn't used her for his plan, this wouldn't be happening. But due to the decisions he had made and the things he had reversed, they had been accumulating, so there was a possibility that the brilliant future of the heroine Camus Morgue had disappeared. Back in the present, Camus began to look at Vicar with a piercing expression, being totally different from before. Vicar approached her, and her eyes filled with confusion and sadness, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but wonder what he had done to her. Camus, who was now an undead, stood firm, and with a serious expression, she extended her hand towards Vicar, summoned a fireball, and prepared to attack. But just before she could make another move, Vicar grabbed her hand, and just before she could do anything about it, he placed his other hand on top of her head, causing her eyes to fill with confusion and alertness. Now that she was immobilized, Vicar firmly grasped her face and without a hint of remorse, forcefully tore off the mask she was wearing, revealing the true face of the undead. Dolores put her hands near her face and couldn't help but be both terrified and astonished at the same time. Upon seeing the true face of Quilty's subordinate, Vicar's expression changed and his gaze filled with disappointment. The demon prepared to attack and began summoning a fireball in her palm. With a murderous look, Vicar grabbed her hand tightly, pushed it aside, and upon seeing that she was preparing to attack, he thought this wasn't good. But just before she could make another move, he drew his sword and swung it forcefully, cutting the demon's neck. The demon's body began to fall to the ground, and the head flew off to one side until several seconds later, both the lifeless body and head hit the floor. Vicar silently watched for several seconds until, due to his injuries, he fell to his knees on the ground. Seeing that the Night Hound was injured, Dolores, who was behind him, panicked and thought this wasn't good. Vicar, now covered in blood, placed a hand and knee on the ground to rest a bit. Dolores approached him, sat down next to him, started using her healing powers as her eyes filled with tears upon seeing that he was hurt. While the lifeless corpse of the demon lay before them, Vicar began observing it in silence. Her attention shifted toward the corpse, and with an expression full of fear she asked if he knew this person. With a lost gaze, Vicar remained thinking in silence. The reality was that this undead really was Camus Morgue. Half of her face was decomposed. Vicar began to lie, saying that fortunately it was an unknown face. Even with his body full of wounds, Vicar began to stand up, saying that it was enough already. Dolores, who was using her power to heal his wounds, panicked and mentioned that the wound was still open. But our boy responded that just with this he already felt perfect. Dolores' mind filled with questions. With an anxious expression she asked why he kept fighting until reaching such a horrible state, asking him to explain a reason. Vicar stood up, clenched his fist tightly and responded that the reason was demon hunting. With a fearful and confused look, she began to stare at him and asked why he was hunting demons. He turned his back on her and mentioned that it was just personal revenge. After saying this, he approached the corpse and gently picked up Camus Morgue's mask. He started observing the mask and began recalling the masks of other demons. This one also emitted a powerful demonic energy, but they were only sacks being used by Quilty's guards. He decided it would be better to investigate further about it. But at that moment, a voice emerged from Camus Morgue's corpse asking Vicar to return the mask. Upon hearing this, both Vicar's and Dolores' attention shifted towards the corpse. They were both terrified and confused at the same time. A mouth appeared on the corpse, and it mentioned that Ephibo, Hebe, Fido, and even Geronto had been borrowed from that woman, revealing that she was going to be furious. Dolores put her hand under her chin and couldn't help but remain open-mouthed and terrified upon seeing a mouth emerge from the body. The mouth recognized Vicar's pandemic mask and quickly realized he was the guy who had been attacking their branches lately. Vicar began staring at the corpse, recognizing it as one of the 10 elite corpses and asking why they were asking if they already knew. With a gaze full of rage, Vicar realized that he was Quilty. Dolores was left open-mouthed and shocked at the same time. She began to observe his mouth, and with a surprised expression realized that this voice belonged to the bastard Quilty. For the demon, it was unexpected to be discovered by the saintess. A smug smile appeared on his face since his plan had worked. For the sake of a great cause, he had no choice but to give up his identity as Quilty, revealing that he had been avoiding touching the saintess out of fear of increasing people's vigilance. But it was no longer necessary. Both remained silent for several seconds until her body began trembling in fear. She had never thought that Quilty was a demon. With an evil smile, Quilty suggested to her to maintain an expression dominated by despair and fear, as he wanted to see this expression when he would remove the soft skin from her face. The saintess clasped her hands and began to pray, causing a powerful golden aura to appear around her body, leaving the demon somewhat confused. She decided not to stand idly by doing nothing, and with a determined look she swore by her soul that she would make the wicked feel the weight of their karma twice. She used the Holy Light ability, causing a powerful light to emerge from the sky and strike against the corpse. Her divine power slowly began to consume the corpse, until several seconds later, it completely disintegrated the demon's mouth. Her power not only disintegrated the demon but also Camus Morg's corpse, leaving only ashes on the ground. Vicar, who was standing next to her, began observing Camus Morg's head and remained silently thinking. Dolores, who had her hands clasped together with an angry expression, asked the demon to reflect in the afterlife. But at that moment, someone who was behind them began licking their lips with a smile, revealing that after all, the saintess's face was rare. Upon hearing this, she didn't take long to recognize the voice, and her eyes filled with fear and despair. And just then, a powerful light struck Vicar's body, piercing his chest without even giving him time to react. Vicar, who was wounded, fell to his knees on the ground, and seeing this, Dolores approached to help. At that moment, someone started approaching them. It was none other than the bastard Quilty, or better known as Dantalian. He put his hand in front of him, making the mouth that Dolores had just disintegrated appear on his palm. He began to smile and with an excited look mentioned that it wasn't polite to interrupt someone in the middle of a sentence. She got angry and asked the demon how he could disguise himself as Quilty and commit such a horrible act. Quilty started walking towards them and with a smile explained that the reason was because he was a demon after all, asking if she was sure about fighting him. Vicar, who was wounded, fell to his knees on the ground, but Dolores stood in front of him to protect him. She extended her hand to the sides and despite being afraid, she accepted the fight. The demon placed a hand over his chest, extended the other towards her and with a confident smile mentioned that she was still an immature novice, questioning if a dying swordsman could face someone like him. At first, Dolores stood firm, but then tears and despair appeared in her eyes. Quilty grabbed her chin and explained that she was trying to act strong without realizing that fear was escaping through her face. The demon approached her, began to look into her eyes, stuck out his tongue and with a smile revealed that she couldn't fool anyone with a face like that. Having the demon so close made her start to feel a fear she had never felt before. Quilty began to show his true nature while drool was falling from his mouth. He started staring at her and couldn't help but smile since he finally had the saintess's face in his hands. But his happiness didn't last long, as Vicar stabbed the Beelzebub sword into the demon's neck, causing his eyes to fill with confusion. He didn't know how Vicar could keep fighting being so injured. The attention of the demon and Dolores shifted towards Vicar. He revealed that he had noticed something about him while following his trail. With a gaze full of rage and thirsting for revenge, he revealed that Quilty was a coward who easily sacrificed his subordinates, and who never wanted to fight head-on, so he had thought that he wouldn't appear unless Vicar was injured. The wound Vicar had on his chest because of Quilty's attack had now healed. With a confident expression, he explained that he had simply pretended to be hurt, revealing that healing wounds like this was nothing for him. Vicar was thirsty for revenge and asked the demon what he thought of his performance. Our boy's sword pierced the demon's head, making his eyes turn red. It seemed that the demon was now dead, but several seconds later, this bastard's eyes began to glow, and his gaze fixed on Vicar. With an exciting smile full of rage, he called Vicar a damned brat and asked him to call him Dantalian. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.